Grayson James returning at starting quarterback after the transfer of Thomas Castellanos, but he's familiar with the role as Castellanos was injured very early in the season last year, and James led Boston College to a very solid 7-5 record. And I think that Boston College is going to be a little underrated this season, but when you take a look at this schedule, you'll understand why they could potentially see some regression in that overall record, despite maybe having a better team. That first game, though, going to be an easy win against Fordham. They'll be 1-0 heading into that road game against Michigan State.
And the Spartans are going to be an intriguing team to watch next year. Aiden Childs and Nick Marsh both entering their second season at Michigan State. Nick Marsh, coming off of an incredible freshman season, was a little overshadowed by another freshman wide receiver in the Big Ten, but he was tremendous in his own right. And Aiden Childs, even though he was a little bit of a turnover machine, did have some great plays throughout the season, has shown his raw athleticism to be a huge bonus to this Michigan State offense. If he's able to refine some of the finer details and limit the turnovers, Michigan State could be a really dangerous team to play against. They are losing a lot on the defensive side of the ball, so they are going to have to win shootouts or expect some guys on defense to step up. But I do think with it being a road trip for Boston College, even though, like Jonah was saying, they might be a little underrated, I don't think they're going to be able to handle the firepower of the Michigan State offense, even though the Boston College secondary is returning so much starting production. I don't think it's going to matter. Michigan State will take the win here and drop the Eagles to 1-1.
And then Boston College opens up ACC play on the West Coast, going to play Stanford. This one shouldn't be a terribly difficult game. The Cardinal really just nothing good on this team. I expect them to be one of the worst teams in the conference this season. Off-season storyline, Andrew Luck joined in a managerial role, and I don't think it's going to make a difference this season, although in the future, that's definitely something that can draw recruits to the program. But Stanford has a long way to go to be built back up to the top of college football. I think Boston College moves to 2-1 pretty easily here before the bye week.
And coming out of that bye week, they welcome a team from the West Coast with Cal coming to visit. And Cal was a team that we were initially pretty high on with the return of Jaden Knott at the running back position and bringing in Devin Brown from Ohio State to be their starting quarterback. But now, with so many players leaving the transfer portal after some disagreements with the boosters and the athletic director, our view on Cal has dramatically shifted, and I don't think they're going to be nearly as good as we initially thought. It's a long road trip for this Golden Bears team as well to face a Boston College team that, like we have been saying, is pretty underrated. Yes, they have to replace Donovan Ezeraku on the defensive line after he had 16 and a half sacks, but they are returning basically the rest of the defensive line. And if those guys just marginally step it up to take over some of those numbers, this Boston College defensive line is going to be very, very solid. And the entire wide receiver room has also returned. That's a tremendous amount of weapons for Grayson James to use. I think Boston College gets the win here. It's going to be a little bit closer of a game just because Cal is shown to have one of the best secondaries in the country year after year. Yes, they've lost a good amount of them, but if they're able to develop them very well, then we could see this be a close game. But I do think in year two under Bill O'Brien, they should be able to get the job done here.
And this is where the schedule starts getting a lot more difficult. You have a road trip to face Pitt. Eli Holstein returning at quarterback position, and he had a really solid year last year. Pitt was one of the weirdest teams in college football, though, starting the season 7-0, finishing the season on a 6-game losing streak, including a 6 overtime loss to Toledo in their bowl game. And I do think that Pitt is going to bounce back from that this season. It really didn't make sense that they lost that many games in a row. I think they were a better team than their 7-6 record indicated, and I think that they will be much better than that this season. Now, against Boston College, I really don't expect Boston College to be able to compete as much in this game. I think that Pitt is just a much better team, and especially with Boston College being on the road, Pitt should be able to win this game pretty handedly. And after that, it's Cade Klubnik and the Clemson Tigers. They are going to be one of the best teams in all of college football next season. Dabo Swinney finally figured out how to use the transfer portal, and just all around, it's a really solid roster that he's built up there at Clemson. They're going to be able to compete for a national championship again this season. It's been a few years since we've been able to say that. I think the Tigers are back and they're just even better than Pitt, and Pitt was already better than Boston College. These are a pretty sure two losses to drop Boston College back to 500.
And the following game is going to be pretty interesting. Not something you would typically associate when you say UConn football, but UConn had a pretty underrated season last year by Husky standards, going 8-4, and they're returning their starting quarterback from last year in Joe Fagnano. And he's kind of an interesting case at quarterback. He only threw for 1,631 passing yards, but he had 20 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, so really efficient overall. If he's able to bump those numbers up a little bit, UConn could be right in the same boat as they were last year, finishing with 8 wins once again. But the defense is losing a lot of the production that they had last year, particularly in the linebacker room. And I think that's ultimately going to be the difference here, especially with it being a home game for Boston College. They have their linebackers returning along with that secondary and defensive line that has most of the roster returning as well. I think overall, Boston College will be able to slow down this UConn offense, and the offense will be able to take advantage of the holes that this Huskies defense will have. This will move them above 500, going to 4-3, but it will be pretty short-lived as they have a road trip to face Louisville the next week, and Louisville is I think one of the more underrated teams in the ACC. They are very, very good, but I don't think anyone is necessarily putting them in contention for an ACC title because they have Clemson, Miami, and SMU in the same conference. But Louisville has a lot going for them this season with the return of their starting running back after a phenomenal freshman season in Isaac Brown. And if he's able to have similar numbers that he did last season, this Louisville team is going to be just as good as they were. Now, they do have a new quarterback taking over because Tyler Shuff is off to the NFL. They brought in Miller Moss from USC, and he had his ups and downs as a Trojan. At times, he did look very, very solid, but towards the end of the season, he did have some turnover issues and was ultimately benched for Jordan Maiava, who similarly had his ups and downs. But I do think Miller Moss has the potential to be a very solid starting quarterback in college football and definitely will be a serviceable quarterback for this Cardinals offense. And defensively, I think they will be just as good as they were last year. We saw Louisville upset Clemson on the road last year. I think Louisville is in great shape to beat Clemson at home this year, too, just because they have so much returning production from the team that beat them last year against Boston College, it won't be much of a competition, especially on the road for the Eagles. They will drop back to 500 here.
And it doesn't get much easier the next 2 weeks as they face college football playoff teams from last season in back-to-back games, both at home, though. The first one going to be Notre Dame, made it to the national championship game last season, and returning Jeremiah Love, who is one of the favorites for the Heisman Trophy, along with Jeremiah Smith, that is not a quarterback. And speaking of quarterback, they're going to have a young guy in there, though I do expect Notre Dame is just going to be a significantly better team than Boston College. And really, there's not much of a chance at all for the Eagles in this one. They'll drop to 4-5 there. And then it's Kevin Jennings and SMU. SMU, albeit not as good as Notre Dame, still was in the ACC championship last season. A very, very solid team. And I think that despite losing players like Brashard Smith at the running back position, SMU should still be a really solid program. And I think that they're also going to be able to beat Boston College, which means that the Eagles, in order to make a bowl game, are going to need to win back to back pretty tough games.
And it starts with hosting Georgia Tech. The Yellow Jackets are one of our favorite teams going into next year, and that is due to returning Haynes King at the quarterback position and Jamal Haynes at the running back position, along with bringing in a lot of weapons for Haynes King, particularly in the wide receiver room, bringing in Eric Rivers from FIU. This is going to be a really solid Georgia Tech offense, along with a defense that has a lot of returning production as well. A defense that was able to slow down an explosive Miami offense last year to upset the Hurricanes. If Georgia Tech is able to build on the success that they had last season, including nearly knocking off their big brother in the Georgia Bulldogs, then Georgia Tech is going to be a team that we could maybe see in the college football playoffs as an at-large bid team if they are able to win enough of their big games or maybe even sneak into the ACC championship game. But compared to Boston College, it's really going to be no competition. Boston College might be able to hang around early on, especially with it being at home with so much at stake. But I do think at the end of the day, the Yellow Jackets are going to be able to beat the Eagles here, dropping them to 4-7. And then after a very late bye week, they are on the road against Syracuse. The Orange are bringing in a new quarterback in Steve Angeli from Notre Dame as Kyle McCord is off to the NFL. And Syracuse is losing a good amount of their weapons from last season as well. Their starting running back is off to the NFL. A lot of their wide receiver room also was either off to the NFL or in the transfer portal, as well as their starting tight end. But they do have a lot of guys returning from the team last year. They were depth pieces at that point, but now being thrust into the starting positions. If they're able to develop and this air raid style offense that we saw last year is just as good with Steve Angeli, then maybe Syracuse can salvage a 500 or slightly better season. But I do think we're going to see some aggression from the Orange after competing for an ACC title last year. But once again, compared to Boston College, I just think they're the overall better team. Boston College can make this close. Once again, like the Georgia Tech game and like so many of these other games, they're underrated and they can make these games close. And maybe they can pull off a couple upsets that we're not predicting, but it really is just too early to tell. We really need to see how Grayson James plays in a full season. We need to see if these weapons still pan out. We need to see if the defense is still as successful as they were last year, especially after losing such a key piece like Ezraku. That's ultimately why we're going to have them losing so many of these games, including 5 games in a row. But by no means should Boston College fans be upset with this season if they're able to get good production out of their players.
That 4-8 prediction is also an upgrade from our way too early prediction of 3-9. And our projection then was 4.1 wins, 7.9 losses. That has come up to 4.8 wins now, 2.8 and 5.2 in ACC play still, though. The floor for Boston College, I think, is as low as 2-10. This could go very, very poorly, and Bill O'Brien could see his tenure as the head coach come to an end quickly. However, I think that this season there's a chance we see Boston College in a bowl game again. They could get up to 6-6, and it's weird to say that with us thinking that Boston College might even be better than last year, that they have a ceiling that's lower than the record that they had. But I think that that is the case with how difficult this schedule is. The ACC really didn't do them any favors. So I do think the ceiling is going to be 6-6. We have our prediction right in the middle of those, though, at 4-8. So thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in our next video.